a person without great loyalty, so long as it is lived on the terms that Sylvie and or Ruth live it, makes the most sense of the human condition. So in other words, the claim or the frustration that readers no doubt feel when they experience Sylvie and Ruth tells us more about those readers than it does about Sylvie and Ruth. These characters are only frustrating and only incompetent from the point of view of normal middle-class American optimism and reality. Or I should say morality. Maybe one of you would come up to Sylvie, shake her, and say, yeah, your dad's dead. Get over it. Her answer is that I can't, I won't, and I shouldn't get over it. You might say, well, then how are you going to go on with the rest of your life? That's indeed a problem. But why should I get over the wrong? You might say to someone like Ruth, don't worry about the future. It'll take care of itself. But Ruth stands for the proposition that how am I not to worry about the future? How am I not to prepare myself for my ultimate end? And why should I concern myself with trifles on my way? The view that tells me to get over it or don't worry about it, that's the one that suppresses what's real, the wrongs that have been done in the past, and my ultimate end that I face. These two are the realistic ones because they have a wide-eyed appreciation for what has happened and what is going to happen. Something that so many casseroles and civics at civic lessons will not cover. You may say, take these girls to the madhouse. They're crazy. I choose that word very particularly. Of course they're crazy from the standpoint of the last man or the modern American morality. But that says a lot about us, not as much about them. Life is tragic. Life is tragic. It has highs and lows. And it always ends with a low. Which is what tragedy does. Do you see that? Does Robinson help you see that? If you don't see it, who's the one being unrealistic? What Robinson is willing to do is create characters in Ruth and Sylvie that treat the tragedies of life as tragedies. And have a difficult time going on after that. They don't get over it. Let's look near the end here for just a moment. Over there, right? Page 204. I may have made the wrong mark here. Shoot, I did make the wrong mark. So I'm not going to find what I wanted to find. No, I was looking for the statement that Sylvie makes, where she says she has, she no longer has any needs. And it's around that area. But just forget it. So let's take a look at their view, page 214. You know, it's just difficult. It's actually difficult to distinguish reality from an image. It's actually difficult to do that. And Ruth recognizes it. She's really self-conscious as a writer about this difficulty and what it means. This tale is a fact-based tale. This is what's happened to this particular family of the Stones. This is what's happened to them. But facts require a setting so you can distinguish important ones from unimportant ones. Facts require a context to illuminate their importance. And that context is just as much part of, this is the difference between, I'll use the word chronicling and history. Chronicling is telling you what dates things happened. This happened on this date. This happened on this date. This happened on this date. That's all true. Those are facts. Do they mean much? No. And insofar as history is the teaching of just those facts, it's not very illuminating. History is the story of why things happen. The story of why something happened at a particular time. And how it's connected to the next thing. There's actual debate about how those things are connected. But those facts only take on, have only interest for human beings if we understand those connections. We don't have chroniclers, we have historians who try to tell us what things mean. Whether they're good at it or not is another question. And Ruth is the same way. She recognized there are certain facts. For instance, we are all conceived. We all come out of nothing. And there's another fact, we all die. These are the things that I can say most certainly about each one of you. I actually know that more than whether or not you're doing well in this class. You're going to die. Oh. Yes, I'm sorry. I consider each of you an experiment, testing the null hypothesis. You're going to live forever. When you die, I mark that as another piece of data that you're not. So far, we're batting 100%, but this is science, and I can't say that the future is going to be like the past. So Ruth explains all of this near the end of the novel. This is the several mysteries that surround her life. On 214, the last paragraph, the one that begins there. When did I become so unlike other people? Either it was when I followed Sylvie across the bridge, and the lake claimed us, so either she's dead, or it was when my mother left me waiting for her, and established in me the habit of waiting and expectation that makes any present moment most significant for what it does not contain. Or it was at my conception. These are the three options. Of my conception, I know only what you know of yours. It occurred in darkness, and I was unconsenting. Right? That's really kind of an interesting thing to say, right? No one asks to be born. You can be pro-choice, but not on this question, right? I, and the slenderest word is too gross for a rare thing I was then. walked forever through the reachless oblivion, in the mood of one smelling night-blooming flowers, and suddenly my ravishers left their traces in me, male and female, and over the months I grounded, grew heavy, until the scandal could no longer be concealed, and oblivion expelled me. But this I have in common with all of my kind. By some bleak alchemy, what had been mere unbeing becomes death when life is mingled with it. So they seal the door against our returning. So that's interesting. I think that actually comes from Two Men and a Little Guy. Was that Tom Selleck movie, that line? I think they stole this from here. But it's very similar to that. Is that the name of that movie? Forget about it. It's too old. So here's one mystery of life. Conception. Where do I come from? Can choice explain this? It's completely inexplicable. So any attempt in modern America to convince ourselves that we construct our life meets at least one very difficult obstacle. You don't choose to live. Hence, there's a big limit on the power of our ability to construct a happy life for ourselves. You can aim at self-improvement, but you can't aim at a self. And any account of life, any realistic account of life, has to give an account of this. The fact that we come into being from non-being. Then there is the matter of my mother's abandonment of me. Again, this is the common experience. They walk ahead of us and walk too fast and forget us. They are so lost in thoughts of their own, and soon or late they disappear. The only mystery is that we expect it to be otherwise. So it's true that in the normal scope of things we will all be abandoned by our parents, which is to say, they will die. It's a wonder that they love us as long as they do. Hope my kids watch this tonight. Not according to any kind of merit, not according to having chosen this child, but rather another mystery is the love that holds together a family and provides an environment for the raising of children. Any realistic attempt to describe human life must give an account of this kind of love. I believe it was the crossing of the bridge that changed me finally, she continues. The terrors of the crossing were considerable. Twice I stumbled and fell, and a wind came up from the north so that the push of the wind and the pull of the current were the same, and it seemed as though they were not resisted, and then it was dark. Something happened. Something so memorable that when I think back to the crossing of the bridge, one moment bulges like the belly of a lens, and all the others are at the peripheries and diminished. Was it only that wind rose suddenly so that we had to cower and lean against it like a blind women groping their way along the wall? Or did we really hear some sound too loud to be heard, some word so true we did not understand it, but merely felt it pour through the nerves like darkness or water? I have never distinguished readily between thinking and dreaming. I know my life would be much different if I could ever say, "This I learned from my senses," while that I have merely imagined. Now, while it's not clear, and I think this is a genuine ambiguity in the novel, and of course, an intentional ambiguity by a writer as careful as Robinson, that this is the third great mystery, that is the mystery of death, the ending of life. Is it the loud sound that takes you to a new place? Why must it happen? Or at least, why has it happened to everyone else in the past? And what should our proper response to that fact be? The genius of Robinson in this book is through the transients and through the incompetent characters, she thrusts upon us these questions and suggests thereby that these are inescapable questions, that any kind of horizon, any kind of cave, any kind of civilization must have a disposition toward these questions, not simply ignore them. So in this, and you'll just have to pardon me for a moment, I brought copies of it, but I'll try to read it like a Frenchman. You'll have fun. Robinson resembles Tocqueville. Tocqueville, it's a long book, there's many chapters, and he talks about many things. And one of the chapters in the second part of the book is, second volume of the book, part 1, is about the kind of poetry or literary experiences democratic people will have. It says aristocratic people have, they kind of elevate certain kinds. They create inimitable characters like Achilles or Odysseus that are tributes to human greatness. Democratic poetry or democratic literary experiences will not be tributes to human greatness. There are no great human beings around. There's no one to applaud. And if you did applaud, people would just be resentful. So don't do it. But he says, look, the common person provides inspiration enough for literature. I have no need, Tocqueville writes, to travel through heaven and earth to discover a marvelous object full of contrasts, of infinite greatness and pettiness, of profound obscurities and singular clarity, capable of giving birth at once to pity, admiration, scorn, and terror. I have only to consider myself. Man comes from nothing, traverses time, and is going to disappear forever into the bosom of God. One sees him for only a moment, wandering, lost, between the limits of the two abysses. If men were completely ignorant of himself, he would not be poetic, for he cannot depict what has no idea of. If he saw himself clearly, his imagination would remain idle and would have nothing to add to the picture. But man is uncovered enough to perceive something of himself and veiled enough so that the rest is sunk in impenetrable darkness, into which he plunges constantly and always in vain in order to succeed in grasping himself. One must therefore not expect poetry in democratic peoples to live on legends, to be nourished by traditions or ancient memories, to try to repopulate the universe with supernatural beings in which readers and poets themselves no longer believe, nor to personify coldly virtues and vices that one can see in their own form. It lacks all these resources. But man remains, and he is enough for it. Human destinies, man taken apart from his time and his country and placed before God and nature with his passions, his doubts, his unheard of prosperity, and his incomprehensible miseries, will become the principal and almost unique object of poetry for these people. That's Robinson's book. She attempts to mine the miseries and joys of man, to give a realistic account of the two abysses, birth and death, between which human beings all live, and to thrust that upon us and attempt to get us to recognize that all of that is true and middle-class morality, while decent enough, isn't realistic. So democracy can be great. as long as it has adequate democratic poets like Marilynne Robinson. That's all. So are there any questions? Yes, Ms. Forrest?
This scene where Sylvie and Ruthie go to the destroyed house, looking for children and putting marshmallows on the tree limbs and what have you. What is that?
That's a great question. I mean, they, as I say, they see things that aren't there. And so this is something I think you really have to reflect on. They see children, they see people that are not there. And they actually dwell and live as if those people are there. Well, where do the people of the lake go? Where do the children who have drowned in the lake go? I take it, and you know, that this is their way of imagining where those people go. But they live, and you expect them. They don't show up, which is disappointing.
No, they never see them, but,
Yeah.
but she
They believe
feels
them.
them.
Yeah.
She believes in them.
Yeah, that's the way I'm not saying, if I knew enough about Indian theology, that is Native American Indian theology, I would, you know, be able to speculate about what children of the woods are. But I take it that's what she's getting
Is
at.
that where she's coming from?
That's my guess.
Okay.
And I recognize, guess, that's the word there. But look, she thinks that people continue to live. But these are not, I mean, I think the book is shot full of Christian imagery, and it obviously is. Its title is Ruth. There's a lot of talk of Noah. There's a lot of talk of Cain and Abel. There's a lot of talk of abandonment. It's not clear that Sylvie and Ruth have any kind of Christian education. That is, they don't interpret life, death, and family necessarily through the lens of any kind of Christian orthodoxy, although I think Robinson herself may. But the ideas that might ultimately be consistent with Christianity are apparent in the book, by which I mean the idea that life is a gift, and the idea that the soul lives after the body. Those ideas are present in these characters. And they just have different, and I think non-Christian, and maybe even unchristian, I'd have to think about that, forms in the book. That makes sense? It's a...
Oh, I don't know, I just had like a comment. I just don't think that, I don't think Ruth actually believes that there's like the people in the forest. I think that Sylvie believes that, but like whenever they're over there, Ruth, she tells herself that she turns into a game when she's like digging for she thinks she's like unburying the children from the house or whatever to save them. Like she's looking at it as a game, and like she says, you know, I can understand why Sylvie thinks that there's children in this forest, and she says something along the lines of like, you know, I could maybe hear them if I wanted to or something, but I don't think she actually, like I don't know exactly why Ruth goes along with Sylvie, because I don't think she's exactly as much like her as, I don't think she's necessarily like Lucille, but she's not, I don't know, she's not Sylvie.
Well, definitely. I mean, I hope I made that clear. They share, I think everything you said is consistent with what I said, and actually what Mrs. Forrest said. Remember, Sylvie is the backward-looking person concerned with death and tragedy. And so she would be precisely the one you'd expect to imagine a wood full of children. Whereas Ruth is the forward-looking person concerned with that particular thing. No, they're very different. Sylvie has, you know, when they go underneath the train tracks and the train comes over and they're waiting for the train to come over, Ruth makes the comment that Sylvie has no concept of time. whereas she was apprehensive. She sat there with apprehensive look. I mean, their attitude toward time is different. They are different characters, but they can be transients together because of what they share, even though they share it from different angles. They share a concern about the tragic sense of life, and they both are aware of the great mysteries that surround us. They both see more in the things around us than is common. So, and it makes each of them incompetent to live in the world in which we live. So I agree, they are different, but they're similar enough that Ruth can say of Sylvie, she's my mother. And they can even, like, she can get in the fetal position and almost try to crawl back in, as she does at one point. Just under the coat, but you know, under the coat, under the skin, it's all the same.
Okay, I have a question.
Go ahead, Miss Edson.
I keep thinking of the scene in Cather's novel when they're on the boat and they're like going over to war, and then one of the boys dies and he gets dropped into the water, and the water just like closes over him, and Claude's like thinking, you know, like it's amazing just how like quickly, you know, the water just didn't even ripple and that was over with. So do you think that like Cather and Robinson are saying similar things, and that like we make this like really big deal about death in our society, but like actually it's not the case because everyone kind of dies? Like everyone dies?
No, I think both of them are trying to make the point that we don't think about it enough. That is, that most of the way our lives are organized is to prevent us from thinking about the primordial questions. So here's my kind of take on that. You know, between the way the setting of this novel, and you know, I think this is also true of Cather's novels, but in a slightly different way, they show the insignificance of the human. That is, the things, Fingerbone is nothing compared to the land in scope and size and stature and time geologically. Fingerbone is nothing, and the people and the inhabitants of Fingerbone are nothing. And that's easier, that's something that, you know, maybe you don't think about all that much, but it's easier actually to think about that out here in the West, where you actually get a scale of what, you get a better scale of what the human is. There is so much around us, and we are so small. I'm from Wisconsin. Everything is agriculture. Everything is cultivated. Everything is man-made and produced. So you really can't turn anywhere without seeing the works of man. And the sensibility, I think, that Robinson cultivates in the way she handles her beautiful descriptions of the topography and the geology, is that no, the man part is really small. And when Jean Yarbrough was out here, she said, wow, you know, I never realized that there were just such wide open spaces. And there, you realize what a big country this is and how much of it is unsettled. And it's like, well, you know, actually that's true. I had the same, you know, you may look at me and think that's very provincial. But I never really recognized that until I lived out here, how true that is. But she's making a deeper and wider point, which is that you see the smallness of ourselves in scale opposed to everything else. And I think Cather, in several of her other novels, but the picture of the ocean and the dropping of the dead body into it is a perfect example of it. It really, we are small. And how do you have such confidence in yourself as a creature given our smallness? That's a question, at least. How can you think you're so great when you are so small? I think she raises that question. I think that's one of those primordial questions that you need an answer to, that we do very little to raise in normal education and middle class life. So is that too much of an answer?
No, I don't think I said my question exactly. I think, like, the scene of the body dropping in the water, and then, like, in this, it's like, I think what the authors are saying is that there's a lot of thought about, like, the person that's still living, they think about death a lot as, like, its effect on them, and the person that died, like, emotionally, like, Claude was just, like, seemed to be taken aback about how, like, insignificant it was, and how everyone moved on really quickly, and that, but people that were, like, close to that person probably were really upset about it. And then so you have Sylvie, who's just, like, you know, one extreme, like, can't get over it. But she doesn't, I don't know if she's actually considering the actual, like, act of death, like, if death were to happen to her. Like I think people focus too much on death as it affects them, but not enough on, like, what exactly is death, I guess. Does that make sense?
I'm willing to accept that. Yes, I think so. Any other questions? Go ahead, Mr. Graff.
So, you said Lucille's suppression of the wrongs in the past allows her to assimilate with the rest of society. So is Robinson saying that could potentially be a problem? Like you're just forgetting the actual truth of the past? Like the facts, like it was suicide, it wasn't, you know. But she says, no, my mother would never abandon me.
Yes, I don't know. I don't know if she thinks that's ultimately a problem. I think such things are essential to living a normal life. I mean, I can defend being distracted. I can defend suppressing bad memories as essential attributes of moving on and getting ahead. The cost is in self-knowledge. The cost of such suppression is that you don't really know yourself. You don't really know the political community you live in. But then, of course, self-knowledge seems to undermine action, which is the problem of Sylvie. So there are sacrifices for living with in a political community that undercut the idea that we can know ourselves and genuinely address primordial questions about how being arrives from unbeing, what the fact that we die means, what past, and how to act in the face of past injustices. Society needs to answer or erase those questions. And Robinson's critique of modern America is that they erase. And hence, it's not ultimately a horizon that can promote self-knowledge, which is, I think, essential for human thriving. Mr. Patterson?
I was thinking, do you think Ruth succeeds more so because she never really needs anybody? Because she sees them all the time. She never really needs her mother, but she enjoys her. I think it's the question people take death so hard because they need this person to feel something in themselves. But Ruth merely enjoys them is kind of what I got. Is Sylvie's stunted in her growth because she's still stuck on the death of needing her father to do this for her. But you see Ruth just enjoying watching her sister go over schematics for a dress. She doesn't need her sister's company, she just enjoys it.
Well, she does say that her needs are fewer and fewer. But I take that to be a comment on her recognition that human beings genuinely have few needs. And so I want to kind of go into something else that you said there, because I want to make sure that I'm clear on a particular point. And now I've somewhat forgotten what I was going to say, so maybe I should just stop. So I'm sorry. Let's face it, sometimes I forget. And I forget when I don't want to. And we're out of time, so thank you all. See you later.